Welcome back to the Hopelessly Gifted podcast. I'm your host, Mark Talaga. Okay, so this episode I have been putting off recording. And as a counselor, as a therapist who's trained in understanding human behavior and rationale and feelings, I had to question, what am I doing putting this off? And this episode in particular related to how to help kids in their social lives, right? How to help kids make friends, how to help kids find connection. It's such an important one. And my awareness is, okay, I think part of the reason I don't want to put this out is because it is so important. And I care so much about this issue. And it's so present and important in life and in humanity and in the parents listening that I just have this fear around, what if I don't do it well? What if I don't give them what they need? What if I focus on the wrong things or talk about what's not helpful? Now, all of those are symptoms. It's not the real problem. And as I started to look deeper into that, I realized what the real problem was and how much it relates to what we're talking about today. And I won't give you what that realization was just yet. You might actually pick it up yourself as you're listening to this episode about what it means to feel like you're not able to do something because of how important it is. Anyway, we're going to jump into some of the more common issues that are presented to me in relation to this social connection, friendship piece with kids, right? So when parents come in, they have relatively the same issue brought up in different ways, which is, I have concerns around my kids' ability to make friends. I have concerns around they're not hanging out with other people. They're not socializing. They're not connected to, kids in their class or kids at their church or kids in whatever context it is. They tend to go off by themselves and play alone, and I'm worried, right? And first and foremost, I want to validate that fear, right? Because what's really underneath that? I'm afraid that they'll never do it, or they'll be a loner, or they won't know what it takes to connect. And socialization is so important to us as human beings. We need it. It is a basic human need to be connected. And so it's a very valid fear. But then it still leaves parents in this state of, I don't know what to do about it. I don't know how to help. And that's what I want to try to address with you more today, about what it really means to support and help a kid who you're feeling or picking up on is struggling with the skill of connection. So one of the things that comes up first and foremost is a description around how the kid, when they do play, or if a play date's set up or they're in a social situation, they tend to get rigidly inflexible around how they play. They need the rules to be a certain way, or they only want to play certain things, or any suggestions that's given to them, they shut down immediately and try to take control of the situation. And for most parents, they recognize, hey, that's a big no-no, and you're not going to make a lot of friends that way. And so they try to instill that message into the kids. You need to be more open. Nobody's going to want to play with you if you are continually shutting things down or only playing in a certain way or getting reactive when somebody introduces something else. And that message is probably understood and intellectualized by gifted kids at any age, but they still don't know what to do with it. And so, as with any issue that is brought up in our office and in our center, we talked to parents about how you need to expand your evaluation of that issue. What's that really about? Why does a kid get rigidly inflexible? Where does that come from? What purpose does it serve? And so the first thing you need to understand is that when a kid is feeling rigidly inflexible, it is a form of them trying to take control in a situation where they don't feel like they have any control. And so they go about it in their very gifted way of manipulating the environment and manipulating the situation to try to get what they want. And the reason they're trying to get what they want is because their scope of what play can look like and what they're comfortable with and what they know how to do is limited. And so once again, we find there's a skill deficit. They don't know how to do it. And that part needs to be understood first. Now, you probably can't go right to your kid and be like, you don't really know how to play. I mean, maybe you could for some kids. But the idea is you're taking it out of the psychological or, it's a character trait of my kid, and understanding that there's a real challenge and struggle with that kid's ability to create more freedom of play outside of where they have skill and ability. And it's, nice when they can find another kid that has like mind and like ability and wants to play in the same way. And that's great. But sometimes that's even a harder challenge to solve for parents out there, of finding those kids versus what it really means to develop a more curious way of looking at why it's as difficult as it is for them to play in other forms. And, typically kids will come back and say, well, I don't like that rule, or it's not fair. Because remember, gifted kids can have a gifted sense of moral justice. What's fair, what's right, what's wrong. And we can validate that they have that, but also try to expand their awareness of what else might be going on there. And part of it is, how does the other kid feel? But, that's really where parents typically go. Like, well, you have to think about how the other kid feels. They might feel shut out, and that doesn't feel good, and you don't want to make them not feel good, right? And again, the kid will intellectualize that, but probably more than likely just internalize that they're doing something wrong. And it's more important that you make it very clear and explicit that they're not doing anything wrong. But if they know that they don't want to make that person feel a certain way, that other kid, and they're doing it anyways, you've got to get a sense of, well, why do you think you missed that? Why do you think that wasn't in your mind in the moment? And then you'll find there's probably some overriding, feeling of, well, I needed it to be this way for some certain reason. I like it this way better, or I don't know how to do it in that other way where they want to play with these rules or these ways of being. And so again, you're helping your kid go a little bit deeper into where there's an actual struggle around why they're feeling the need to get rigidly inflexible. Now, for some kids that are really, really young, you're probably not going to get that level of awareness out of them. And so it's probably more about you as a parent being positively manipulative and creating situations where they are being forced at home or in a more controlled environment of exploring that sense of what it means to play differently and how they can do it and how you can help them achieve that in the moment. It takes a little bit more work on the parent's part in that regard, but you're at least working on what the real issue is rather than the symptomology that you're feeling helpless or stuck in. And, other parents will bring up issues like, well, my kid gets really annoying, right? They'll be really repetitive, or they'll say the same joke over and over, or they'll get in another kid's face and be a little too touchy-feely with their hands and feet. And again, the other kid isn't liking it. And so it's creating a dynamic where, the whole connection piece is getting lost and the kid is not getting what they need ultimately. And once again, we can tell them, well, don't do that and keep your hands to yourself and this, that, and the other. But that's really just addressing the symptom. Once again, expand your understanding of where that's coming from and why that might need to be there. So in a sense, you're looking at, why would a kid be real overly touchy-feely with some other kid when the other kid is being very clear, stop, I don't like that. It's not that they're ignoring the other kid's pain or words, even though they may not be processing it, which is something you got to look for. But it may be more the idea of they are once again feeling that they are trying to create connection. They're trying to be funny or fun, or that's what they like. And so they're over-relying on that skill, and the function of it has good intention behind it, right? I want to connect. I want to be closer. But the execution is creating a different result. And so once again, it goes back to, I see you're trying to connect. I see you're trying to be close with them. I see you're trying to have fun with them. But you're limited in your ability to do that by only going through one way. Some kids do like to wrestle. Some kids do like to be real, crazy with one another. My son, he is a very sweet boy, though he can get explosive. And he has some neighbor kids across the street who are a lot more physical. And, I love when he goes to play with them because he kind of gets a different form of play, a different kind of play that he wouldn't maybe seek out. And on some level, it's challenging him to step up in a different sense and also learn how to set limits and learn how to deal with, different forms of play that he might not naturally, tend to do. And so it's not always a bad thing when kids are forced into a situation where they're being, put outside of their comfort zone. And so your kid, by playing in a different, unique, maybe more intense way, might actually be helping the other kid develop more skills to it, as long as the other parent recognizes that's what's happening, and as long as you, as the parent of your kid, realize that's what's happening, right? And so we're looking at the context of the behavior and what purpose it's serving. And is it serving the purpose that they're looking for? And are they even aware of what they're really trying to do through that behavior? Do they get that they're trying to connect more or be closer? A lot of siblings are this way. We have siblings where they're all up in the face of the other kids. And ideally, they're trying to be fun and funny and closer, and even through some more aggressive stances, trying to find a purpose behind, whatever it is they're doing. And your job as a parent is to really make it explicit that you see what they're trying to do. And can we think of other ways of how we're going to accomplish that? And, if they can think of other ways or they're aware of other ways, then why do they feel like they're missing that or that doesn't get put on the table? And through this, method of expansion and understanding and seeing, where the birth order is and, how maybe you grew up as a kid and how, that hits you a certain way or doesn't when you see your kid playing, more aggressively or more timidly. You've got to put yourself as a parent into the evaluation process. Why am I reacting the way I'm reacting? Why am I not telling, him the positives of his behavior, or why am I only focused on the negative or vice versa, whatever it is? And what's that say about me? And what does that say about what I'm struggling with in this context? The most important thing you can do is treat an issue like social connection as a very complex one. And that is more how you want to approach it rather than the normative, parenting advice of punishment or, gentle parenting or timeouts or whatever the, parenting du jour strategy is for the day. And so you're really, again, being that person who is helping your child evaluate the struggle and the challenge while paying attention to your own challenge and struggle with it. There's a lot of parents out there who will come in and talk about how worried they are for their kid because they're, playing only with younger kids or playing only with older kids, or they only really connect with adults. And you've really got to make sure you're looking at your own values and biases as well and doing your own work as you are looking into why that is a problem or not a problem. And it very well could be a problem, by the way. It could be something that does need to be addressed. But if you're not putting yourself into it and you're not dealing with what it's feeling like for you as a parent and using that awareness and relationship with your kid, right? Letting them know that you are watching them possibly struggle to do something and what it feels like for you as a parent to know that that's what they're going through. But here's where I don't want you to just wallow in the victimhood with the kid. I want you to be the expert, right? I know that there's more going on here. I know that we don't have it all figured out yet, but I know that you are trying to make something happen and it hasn't happened yet. And what I think we need to do, as you're saying this to your kid, what I think we need to do is be a lot more expansive and try to really understand this at a deeper level so that we really start to deal with what the problem is. And by communicating that this issue is bigger than, a gifted kid's ability to solve it with their brains or with their, rigid inflexibility and, gifts of manipulation, you're conveying to them that they don't have to do it alone. And if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, I'm going to hit that point home hard. You don't have to do anything alone. You shouldn't do anything alone. nobody really creates anything great alone. And so that is why when you're dealing with something as what we would maybe call simplistic as, oh, they're just not, engaging with other kids, you're going to be the first line of defense to say it's not a simple solution. It's not going to be an easy fix. It's not going to be just explaining to them why what they're doing isn't working, or explaining to them that they're hurting other kids' feelings, or explaining to them that they'll never make friends if they don't figure this out. That's not going to do it, because you're making it sound too simple. You're dismissing the unique nature and unique vulnerabilities of that kid, and probably dismissing your own unique vulnerabilities of yourself and what you've been struggling with in this same issue, as a human being. So, we're also dealing with the issue of how difficult it can be to work with a kid through this and to find environments and situations that are a better fit, right? Let's say the kid starts to understand what it really means to connect, and they're desperate for connection, but they're living in a very, rural, remote area where there's not a lot of opportunity for them to be with other kids, maybe outside of doing it online. And that's a real challenge, right? You have an environment that doesn't support the connected piece of your kid's identity, right? Their social, needs that they have. And a lot of parents will say that I don't have anybody out here. There's nobody out here for them to play with even. And this is where, again, you're looking at what you're trying to solve for that kid. What you want to see happen in this kind of normative sense is that they're out in the yard with another kid, playing a game, having fun, laughing, making memories. But connection exists in a multitude of ways. I mentioned earlier how some kids connect better with younger or older kids outside of their chronological age. That's perfectly fine. That's okay. That's still connection. And yes, it's probably more within their wheelhouse at the time being, and developmentally, they maybe don't have those skills that we're talking about assessing for and seeing what needs to be scaffolded and built up. But you've got to be more okay with, hey, they're still working on what it means to relate to another human being, and what it really means to relate, outside of themselves. And sometimes, it's going to fall on you as the parent of what does it really mean to relate? And how do I create, a relationship with my own kid that's more real and, gives them what they need, but also challenges them in those areas where they're underdeveloped. And in my head, I'm thinking of, when parents tend to go into this place where they're either just validating the heck out of the kid for everything they're doing and how awesome they are, because you're trying to be supportive and loving, and that's fine. Or they go to the place where they're coming down hard on the kid because the kid just isn't changing their behavior, and it feels like a constant power battle and a struggle. And on either side, you're losing out on a real, authentic relationship between you and this small little person, or big person. It could be an adult too, by the way. And so what I would challenge parents to do is to say, okay, how do I become more authentic with them in my own responses and my own reactions, knowing that they're trying, to accomplish something by their sharing with me for the 100th time that day what they've accomplished in Roblox, right? I'm tired of just saying, oh, great, that's amazing, that's wonderful. And I'm tired of saying, please don't show that to me anymore. If I see it again, I'm going to throw the iPad out the window. More of, I can tell how important it is for you to be sharing this with me. And there's a part of you that is struggling to realize that I care about it, which is why I think you're bringing it up to me more and more and more. And so, and I might be wrong on that. Maybe there's other reasons you're showing it to me, and I'm more curious about what that might be, right? That's a more real, honest, authentic form of communication around something that seems very simple. And that's ultimately what we're trying to teach these kids, right? How to connect beyond just simple things of, oh, I like this and you like that, we're friends now. Or I like this and you were mean about it, and so now we're not friends anymore. Real relationships are way more complicated. They ebb and they flow, and there's accountability and things built into it that we're trying to help that kid understand. And so, but a long way of saying, that even if they don't have those opportunities in their immediate vicinity, doesn't mean you can't be reinforcing these things that really matter and what the kid really needs to learn. And then additionally, we can challenge you even further and say you might need to be the one that creates a group or seeks out where these gifted kids are. And I'm sure a lot of you do this, by the way, but where you're taking more charge in trying to create that thing that you feel like will be a better fit for your kid. And going, and that can be very, that's met with a lot of resistance when I put that challenge to parents, because it's like, well, I don't have any time and I don't have the energy and I'm already overwhelmed, which is true, right? Nothing gets dismissed in that. But it's what I'm trying to say is that I'm validating how important this is for you. And so I'm willing to say, hey, there's a realistic thing that might need to be done that's very challenging. And I don't want you to do it alone, but I also don't want you to dismiss that might be something you need, right? And when I do that to parents, I'm basically meta-communicating what I want them to do to their kids. I get a sense that you being connected with other kids is super important and it really matters to you and you want it to go well, but you're not sure how to make that happen. And so when I create opportunities for you, it's not that you need to jump up at everyone and I'm just expecting you to do it perfectly, but I'm wanting you to know that I'm going to be with you as you're developing skills of how to better connect and start to problem solve on what the real issues are that you're struggling with that create these bad situations. And you'll notice throughout all of this, I'm really not allowing anybody to be in a victim mindset. I'm not letting anybody be a person where, oh, my kid's always getting bullied and they're never going to have friends and they're traumatized and they're, no wonder they can't do it. That's all valuable. And I'm not going to dismiss it entirely and say that's not true. It is true. But it doesn't mean that you cut off this part of who you are that really has a need for something around connection and around friendship. And so it's this very delicate dance of how you keep kids in an empowered state or keep parents in an empowered state while validating their real life struggles around it. But my job isn't to just do those two things. It's to expand their awareness about how much other factors are playing a role, how much more there is to this. You got a kid, as simple as they have severe undiagnosed auditory processing. Guess how that affects their relationships? Severely. They can't really hear what another kid is saying. They're only picking up on the tone of the other kid rather than the words. And so because they can't process language and communication effectively, it throws off a lot of stuff, right? That's one extra thing to look at for a kid. And there's more, right? There's this idea of, does this kid have a sense of what it's supposed to look like, what they think friendship's supposed to look like, rather than what, is really there in front of them, or that it might be more nuanced and, more adaptive to their unique self. I didn't know friends can just, be sitting in a room together, being silent, but enjoying each other's company. Sure, why not? I have friends like that. And I don't always need to feel the pressure of creating this hallmark moment of conversation, though that can happen at times, but it's being allowed to be who you are as you are, and knowing that as long as you're intentional, that you're still trying to create the purpose of connection in life, that you're okay, that you're doing the right thing, that you're doing the steps, that you're in a process. And, I'm going to relate it back now to what I started with today, why I was so hesitant to put this episode out, and why I still feel some anxiety that, boy, am I giving them enough? Am I giving them the right thing? Because it matters, and I want to do it well. And if I'm really serious about that, what I need to do is I need to put this episode out as is, and then I need to let the people that I, trust and believe in and are my mentors and support in my life listen to it, and then receive honest feedback around it, that maybe I did miss things, or maybe I did it perfectly. Who knows? But the idea is, if I can do that and be okay in that process, if I know that it's a growth process, and I acknowledge how much this matters to me and how much it matters to the people out there listening, I can start to become aware of why I tend to not want to do it because I want to do it to the best of my ability. And your kids probably feel that way too around their friendships. I want it to go well. I want it to be great. I want a friend for life. I want that deep level of connection because gifted kids really need and desire connection that is not just surface level for most of them. They want depth. And when they don't know how to create it, and when they're afraid that they're not going to get it, you start to see other behaviors crop up. And again, this is just one extra factor among the other things that we talked about. We're looking at multitude of reasonings behind why a kid might struggle to connect. And then they do get this negative messaging over their life of, you're supposed to be a certain way. And if you're not that way, you're not going to get what you want. I had a client share a story with me, and they said it was perfectly fine for me to mention it here, that they were at a like a camping outing school type event, some chaperoned thing with other kids. And they were, of a certain age, around 10 or 11, and they were in a group situation, and they were just basically making a big mud ball with their feet, right? They were doing something that from a normative perspective might be a little on the juvenile side or younger, developmental age kind of behavior. And they were basically called out as being, immature and acting inappropriately. And if you're not able to just, listen up and stop playing with that mud, then I don't think you can do the rest of this trip. I don't think I feel confident in you doing it. And obviously that's a very heavy negative message to receive as a kid because you just feel bad and think you are bad and think you're not able to do the things you need to do. But what was really not being understood was this is a kid that is both on certain days of the week, a 2-year-old and a 25-year-old, right? It's asynchronous. And with asynchronous kids, we have to be very careful that we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We're not saying, hey, you know what? I know you still care about this, but yet you're acting in a way that may be perceived as juvenile, but there might be a reason to it. There might be something where I'm not even aware of how much you're getting, but I'm perceiving you as not listening or not taking care of it. And, so this is what that, counselor or adult just didn't and wasn't able to do for this kid. And they internalized it and still think about it to this day. And it's just a really great example of what it means to be an asynchronous kid trying to thrive in a world that doesn't fully understand asynchrony. But it starts with you as the parents. Do you fully understand asynchrony? Do you fully understand how that means that you need to be very intentional about understanding all the different factors and pieces of what makes that kid tick? And that it's much more than just, oh, they had this behavior, that means this. It's way too simplistic. And if you're feeling a little overwhelmed in how to do that or what that would really need to look like for your specific case or kid or situation, I always encourage you to reach out. Send me an email, send me a note, go to the hopelesslygifted.com website and reach out because I don't want anybody having to go through things alone, especially if you're starting to recognize there is a better way for me to deal with this. And I kind of get what Mark's saying, but I'm not sure how to create that in my life. Well, don't do it alone. I don't. And so I encourage you not to as well. And only through that process where you're taking step by step, you're owning that it really matters to you and starting to understand why it really matters to you that your kid is not connecting at the level and why it matters to them and why it's feeling impossible or feeling so difficult. Then and only then can you start to really get a sense of what might need to be done. And so, if you're in a mess, you go back and assess. That's just off the top of the dome. But you're trying to always say, I'm probably missing something, and that's why this is as hard as it is. I don't want to assume I know why it's not happening, and I don't want to be stuck in a place where I'm just describing what's happening without any way to further expand awareness for myself or my kid about what needs to be dealt with. Okay, I hope this was helpful. I hope that you found something out of this, and I hope maybe it even expanded your own thoughts of what you might be missing with your own kid. And then what I would encourage you is not to say, oh, I missed it, I made a mistake, but really dive into why did I miss that? Or why did I feel like I wasn't able to say that, or what am I trying to protect in my kid that I wouldn't, say that, or I miss this thing of how I need to be with them, and only use it as a place to evaluate further for what that might really be about, what's really going on. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you as always for listening to the Hopelessly Gifted podcast. Please reach out if you need anything at all, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.